and welcome to episode 7 of the third season of the Detours in Music podcast. My name is Laura Rupel, and today I had the pleasure of interviewing Michael Chertock, professor of piano and the piano department chair at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. Hope you enjoyed today's episode.
My name is Michael Chertock, and I am chair of the piano department at CCM, the College Conservatory of Music. And I've also been fortunate to serve as principal keyboardist of the Cincinnati Symphony for about 30 years and have lived in Cincinnati since going to school here back in the late 80s. And happy to be talking with you today.
Yeah. Can you talk about your start in music?
Sure. I started piano lessons instituted for the family by my mom kind of late in the game at about 9 years old, and really didn't start to get serious about it till about the age of 14 or 15, which is very, very late, especially these days. But got very enthusiastic when I did, and started setting aside a lot of time to practice, particularly during late junior high and high school, and received many warnings from people that the music business is volatile, unpredictable, and difficult, all of which are true. But decided to go for it anyway. Always felt that I was one of those people that was not going to do well if I didn't do music.
When do you think you had the realization that you wanted to pursue music as a career and not just pursue it as a hobby?
I think around the age of 15 or so. We were living on the island of Guam. My father was in the Navy, and they had a local television station there. And they offered people on the island sometimes the opportunity to host their own show. Mm-hmm. And so they said, how would you like to do a piano music show? And this kind of blew me away, and getting dunked into suddenly trying to prepare enough music to fill a half-hour segment was very thrilling and exciting. What I had not understood was that it wasn't a multiple series of episodes. It was going to be one program, and they ended up showing it scores of times. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what got me to jump in the water completely.
Yeah. Where did you attend school for your degrees?
I got both my bachelor's and master's degree in piano performance right here at CCM. Had been living in Washington, D.C. before, and came out and visited Cincinnati in February for the audition, which is probably not the best month to visit here. Mm-hmm. And then came in the glorious fall and really fell in love with the town and the school.
Do you think that that gives you a unique experience as a professor here to have had your college experience here as well?
Oh, yes, because it makes me very annoying to my colleagues, because I like to pull that perspective out often at the most ticklish moments. Mm-hmm. Also makes me annoying to the students, because they can't tell me I don't know what it's like to do X, Y, or Z because I was here. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, things have changed a lot since the late 80s. I mean, that's really almost 2 generations ago. I guess it is 2 generations ago. And there is a lot that's different. The buildings are different. On the other hand, there's a lot that's very similar. The focus of the school, the strengths of the different departments in some ways are still kind of similar. CCM is still CCM. It's a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more international, but it was always international, and it always wanted to be a catalyst for putting people on the world stages.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. What is one of those things that you struggled with in your undergraduate degree?
Oh, goodness. Let's see. Sometimes saying no. I find this as a professor, and I also found this as a student. If you do every single thing the college, conservatory, and university put in front of you as a worthy opportunity, you would need 3 clones of yourself in 24 hours a day to do it. You kind of have to pick and choose, and you have to learn quickly how to prioritize things. I remember the second half of my second year, and actually years were divided into quarters before 2012, into 3 distinct quarters. Had a very difficult time saying no to anyone that asked me to play for any situation, and really got virtually overwhelmed. I remember again holding an assistantship as a master's student while attending school full time and starting to play part time with the symphony. It was at times overwhelming. On the other hand, it was all very exciting too. And I remember distinctly the support of all the instructors with kind of getting your feet wet outside of school, trying to get downtown, trying to get on a plane and go somewhere and perform or play or compete. There was really a lot of support for that. And I think that's super important for students, that the professors, of course, we have to hold students accountable to the educational goals we set together here at school, but we also want to have an eye to getting the students out into the changing musical world.
It's also nice as a student, we can all feel overwhelmed. So it's nice to know that our professors, not that you can't be overwhelmed now, but it seems
right.
It's good to have that perspective as well.
I think too, it should be a little bit seasonal. I mean, there's 4 traditional seasons in the year: spring, one of renewed energy and enthusiasm; summer, maybe a season not as productive; fall, huge energy, harvesting productivity; and maybe a winter of I don't know. I almost think of winter as the overwhelming season at CCM, where I think the responsibilities and the commitments seem immense. Maybe the energy isn't quite as strong. And I always tell people, hold on till spring. You're going to make it. And not all 4 seasons, I think, should feel that way, nor should all 4 seasons be summer.
No.
We need the bent of the thing to be towards growth and knowledge and productivity, but that doesn't mean there can't be pockets of recovery and pockets of a lot of stress and pressure, which hopefully can strengthen us.
Definitely. Do you have advice for younger students and players for which things are not going as expected? One way could be career opportunities. One way could be maybe time management skills, or what's something you feel like you see a lot with students?
Let's start with time management skills. And I like that you said management and not say control. Some people seem to be born with this ability. I am not. I find it very helpful on Sunday evening to take out a calendar. And for me, I use still a paper calendar because I want to see it and I want to physically write on it, and make out a schedule of virtually every hour of the Monday through the Friday. Literally write out what your plan is and your goals for each waking hour of the day. And try as much as possible, if you're majoring in an instrument or voice, to see how early in the day you can put that work. Particularly if you're like me, tend to be a little more a morning person than an evening person. I know I've always had a hard time, even as a musician, kind of translating this in a way that works for night people. And I have to figure they're going to have to find their own way. But for people who can get up early in the morning, and a lot of undergrads have to do that anyway, I challenge them: your first class is at 8. See if you can come in at 6:30 or 7 and practice an hour and a half or an hour before your first class, so that in a way you feel like you have a jump on the day. I think what happens, a lot of being overwhelmed, is getting bogged down and finding yourself with your energy already tiring at the end of the day and tons of things to do, staying up later and later, getting less sleep, becoming more and more fuzzy. So I really recommend getting ahead, always trying to stay constantly a little bit ahead if possible. The other thing I like to do with students as we prepare for kind of where the rubber meets the road, taking what you've learned and going out in the world, is we take a sheet of paper and divide it into 4 corners. One corner is for your principal musical performing talent, and we describe the different things the student does well. The second corner, I would call it your teaching corner, which everyone, even if I have a student who says, I'm never going to teach in my life, A, I never believe them. B, we still fill out that corner. Well, if you did, what parts do you do well? What do you think you need to do a little work on? The third corner, I would call it your unique musical talent. What do you seem to be good at in the areas connected to music? For instance, I have one student who's a talented digital editor and has actually made kind of faux film scores, alternate film scores for well-known films by stringing together other pockets of music. It's very interesting. Some people, it is playing collaboratively, arranging. Perhaps it's a classical player who has an incredible gift for ska or country music or something like that. You might call it an alternate musical gift, which or theory to the performer, or somebody studying theory who happens to be a very strong choral singer. The fourth corner, which I think is very important, is all of your, quote, non-musical skills. The person who's very gifted technologically, the person who is very good at making presentations, the person who's a good salesperson, the person who's I'm a great listener, somebody might write, or I speak 4 languages, and include that in the mix of things. And never consider your musical future without looking at kind of the 4 corners of your arsenal of skills, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, I guess you never know like what kind of combination of those 4 corners will lead to a job or an opportunity.
Correct. For instance, if somebody their goal were to play an orchestra, do you know what non-musical skill is utterly critical to holding a position in a full-time symphony orchestra? The one you must have is punctuality. If you're not on time 99.99% of the time, it cannot possibly work. And
Very true.
I know a lot of musicians, even very successful musicians, are not on time. It won't work in orchestra. Now, on the other hand, if you wanted to be let's say, I don't know about singing an opera, or I've been told in broadcasting, a lot of people who get positions in broadcasting in electronic media, being able to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and show up fully made up. I don't know if I could do that these days. A lot of these non-musical skills become kind of essential. And I often find sometimes when a very talented student is struggling in their career goals, sometimes it is insufficient development of a non-musical talent that can be the problem. For instance, a poorly put together resume, or maybe letters of recommendation on which there's negative comments about not the student's artistry, but maybe the student's not good things happening in other areas that aren't musical. So very important to keep all of these things together. We all know stories about crazy musicians who have been very successful, but usually the happier stories are around folks who have integrated their personalities really well.
Yeah, and I think as a student going through music school, you might be feeling like you don't have time to focus on those other extra musical skills, but sometimes those are the things that really put you in the best positions.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's important too, when studying our heroes, is not to make the assumption, because everybody has flaws and demons and things that don't go well and right, is to assume they're all inexorably tied together. I think a lot of musicians have succeeded in spite of certain things, not because of them.
Mm-hmm.
And not a safe assumption to say, well, Paul McCartney did X, Y, and Z, and look how well things turned out for him. Well, mm-hmm. maybe they turned out well in spite of X, Y, and Z. And mm-hmm. I don't want to necessarily take that as my model. On the other hand, these stories can be really encouraging too, because no matter how perfectly someone behaves, performs, comports themselves, things go wrong. Mm-hmm. People need to make detours, turn themselves around, and I think that's life.
Yeah. Have you considered what you would be doing if you were not a musician?
Oh, yes. To be honest, in my junior year, I almost thought of not dropping out, but completing the undergraduate degree and trying to become a physician. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a very good thing that I did not do that. I think I did the right thing, staying on the musical side of things. Now, if somebody said, what would you do if you weren't a musician? My first answer would be, well, I'd probably be homeless. Mm-hmm. But the second answer would be maybe something in writing or in something close, also in the liberal arts. Possibly maybe some form of counseling, because I think there is a lot of that in teaching. Mm-hmm. That's a very hard question.
Yeah.
I think at the beginning of COVID, a lot of us started asking ourselves this question very seriously.
Yeah.
When there was sort of uncertainty, how many institutions are going to be able to survive this? Mm-hmm. But it looks like a lot of them are changed, but surviving so far. Sometimes, particularly an instrumentalist, taking that away, it's like taking away a wizard's spells. I wouldn't be a wizard anymore. It becomes a huge part of your life and your identity. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason teaching is so important is, among many other reminders, it reminds you that you were given a gift, but the gift doesn't really belong to you. The gift, you are a steward of it. You maybe even hold possession for a while, but it is something to be passed on. And it is something, if one lives long enough, I would like to play till the day I died, but I don't have illusions that if I live to my grandfather's age of 98, things are going to have to change. I saw what his hands and fingers looked like when he passed the age of 85. And it's not hard to figure out the relationship with the instrument would have to change. Mm-hmm. And responsibilities may have to be relinquished. I think also as teachers, it's very important as we start to get older to start to wish and will and bequeath ever increasing significant size and stature to our students, even mm-hmm. if it be at our own expense. My generation needs to eventually become less so that the next generations can become more.
Looking back, has your career changed focus?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. There have been a lot of kind of 5-year periods of emphasizing this or that. Immediately when I was done with college, I started playing keyboard with the CSO and had not really had a lot of background with orchestra experience. And suddenly here's a whole new level of expectation, a completely different concert every week, playing really as many as 8 or 9 different keyboard instruments. organ, harpsichord, piano, celeste, synthesizer, even once African thumb piano, which is really more like a percussion instrument, and a couple other forms of keyboard, no clavichord yet, different conductors, different things. Then about 4 years later, I started recording a series of albums of movie music for Telarc. So he was kind of like a crossover experience, sort of 1 foot in the popular world, 1 foot in the classical world. And sort of, instead of doing the traditional pianist path of going to as many competitions as possible, trying to put more energy into this and arranging and paying attention to movie culture and things like that. And then in my 30s, it was more playing concerti with different orchestras. Never got hugely into recitals, which is funny because most pianists spend their whole youth preparing for that solo recital repertoire. And that it always seemed to be some other emphasis, chamber music, or even conducting later on. And so many continuous detours, I think, around what was the principal expectation.
How would you define the detour moments for you?
I have a saying I use to the students. You take a bunch of dry paper towels, you dip them in water, and you throw them against the wall, and you see which ones stick. And if the paper towel sticks, focus on that one. If it falls straight to the floor, put that aside for the time being. There are two models of kind of goal setting and goal achieving I've heard of. One was the Winston Churchill one, where you focus on your objective, no matter how crazily the winds blow against you and how terrible circumstances are, never release your objective. The other is the Napoleon model, where he would apparently get up on his horse, he would look around, look at the weather, look at the state of his troops, at the state of their supplies, at the state of the enemy, and then he would make his decision. What are we going to do? What can we do today? What is the weather making possible? What are the circumstances making possible? I think I've been more the second type than the first type. I've heard of people say, I'm going to do such and such or bust. I was a little more like, I'm going to do something in this area or bust. I'm just not entirely certain what it is. And I don't like to say or bust because I have kind of a flexible definition of what is successful. Different things are successful at different periods of life. When I first learned to drive the car, getting my sister successfully home from junior high school was a big achievement. Now, not so much. Well, the big difference between oboe and piano, this making of reeds and everything. But yes, I can imagine people are going to be saying to you, are you going to teach? Are you going to try to play an orchestra? Are you going to play in one of the military bands? Such and yeah. And it's funny, we ask people this when I don't think most people who are really young, they can answer some very complicated philosophical questions, but a lot of times don't necessarily answer in a simple way what it is that they really feel they're best at or like to do, how they like to structure a day. That's something sometimes we don't find out until way after a lot of these decisions about career have been made, and that's unfortunate.
Or it's discovered through context and experience, and not just like thinking ahead.
Yes. No, definitely true. True.
What brought you to the job you're in today? I know you were a student and then you were able to play with CSO, but how did you get the position with CCM?
Oh, okay. My first college teaching position was actually at Miami University of Ohio in the late 90s or mid 90s. And it's a college up the road about an hour, very fine school and department of music there. And I was teaching part-time with them. And about the time my oldest daughter was born, they needed someone to teach at CCM part-time. I was still quite young, and I started then in 1998, and they ended up, oh goodness, this is very sad. They had two professors die within a short time of each other, the late Professor Richard Fields and the late Professor Bill Black, whose studio I'm in right now and who was chair of the piano department. Um, After Professor Fields died, the numbers were such they didn't need to fill the position completely, but they needed me to do some more teaching. But when Bill Black died of cancer, they decided to have a search, and it ended up two of the finalists were me and Awadajan Pratt, my colleague, and they ended up having kind of an unexpected retirement as well, and they hired both of us out of the finalists. It was quite applying and winning a college position is about as grueling an ordeal as winning an orchestra position. And then you, of course, have the steps towards tenure, if it's a tenure track position, which are a lot of documentation, and they want to see a lot of activity and achievement and all of those things. And before you know it, you find yourself significantly older than the students. And it's super important to remember all the different steps. I'm especially feel for a student when they feel they're caught between multiple aspects of their program. I don't like to see a student who perceives that they're caught between two different professors. I think that's terrible. Or between the demands of one part of the program and the other. And I remember occasional moments when that felt that way. But usually when pointing out the difficulty in a civil manner, usually it was worked out. And things came about. It is extremely important, though, I think, to remind oneself at all times the arts have always been a challenging field. I mean, all professions, all vocations are challenging. They have unique problems. But the arts they've never been easy. And it's not, if a person isn't highly motivated in it, like, I've got to do this on some level, I really must do this, even if I ended up in a different career area, I still had to have this massive season of my life of improving my abilities as much as I could to feel good about the progress of one's life. Then I would say, don't. I'm very hard when I meet a high school junior or senior who sort of says, yeah, I was kind of thinking about what I should do, and I noticed I do pretty well in music. I think I play better than most of the people in my school. That is not enough the difficulties are too that is not going to do it. We all have a story we can tell about some musician who sort of fell into it. I'm never entirely sure I believe it. You encounter every now and then somebody so overwhelmingly gifted, it seems whatever they touched would turn into gold, but I'm always a little bit suspicious. Music demands a lot. It really does. And I think a lot of people who go into music are very bright and very talented, and many could have succeeded well in other areas. And I think if a person wants to maximize their financial potential, I think the arts is the wrong choice. It's not. Go into energy or into real estate or something like that if that's what a person wants to do. It doesn't mean a person can't forge out a dignified living. But if a person is really intent on developing expensive tastes, I would recommend to look for something different. Just don't think it's a good idea.
What are your goals for your studio and field right now?
Very good. for my oldest students, my doctoral students, or the students who are going to complete their final degree, let's say it's master's degree, usually the bachelor's degree is not a final degree. I want to see them attached to the industry, to the music industry, in a way that gives them room for growth, achievement, a certain level of excitement, but also eventually some level of security. So we talk a lot about the development of their careers. We talk about that a lot the older they are. Mm-hmm. For my youngest students, by which I mean my undergraduates, I do not believe there is any shame in an undergraduate student having, well, there's no shame in anyone having a change of vocation, none at all. This can happen. Oh, for goodness sakes, a person could get their doctorate and get seriously injured and not be able to play their instrument, and things would have to change. But with undergraduates, aside from a lot of musical expectations, I rely on my undergraduates kind of to keep me in touch with how the music world is changing, because it is so incredibly fast. The delivery systems of music have changed so much. When I was a kid, it was long playing records, 45s, then 8-tracks, cassette tapes, compact or digital tapes, compact discs. Then we start to get into things like iPods and iPads and streaming and MP3s. And I don't even know if MP3s are current anymore. You could probably tell me 100 ways that I don't know. My daughter taught me about Spotify and all these different things. I even had some things I produced selling on venues I'd never heard of. Mm-hmm. So I like the young ones. There's a little bit of back and forth. I try to talk to them about the things that don't change. They talk to me about the things that do. Mm-hmm. But I also encourage, an undergraduate degree is a great time to find out, is this a good idea? Is this the way we're going to go forward? And for instance, one of my Bachelor of Arts students has every intention of becoming a physician with a special in genetics. She does not intend to become a professional pianist, although she would like to teach. And she's very clear on that. But she's getting a Bachelor of Arts in piano with the intention of going on to medical school. Terrific. I had another student who actually got his master's in piano, and now he is an oncologist. That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But I've got plenty of others who say, no, I am going forward. One of my former students writes operas and has a show potentially in development for Broadway. Even though he studied piano and teaches piano at Skidmore University. His name is Evan Mack. There have been alumni from the piano department here that have gone on to become Hollywood composers. And there are many who have followed what I would call the traditional route. They have entered competitions and now are teaching at very prestigious competitors of ours. We've had a lot of students from Asia who have gone back to Asia and are now teaching at Beijing Central Conservatory and Shanghai Conservatory. So again, I want to build the whole musician, the whole person with my students, but I'm dependent on them a little bit to help me help them shape it in the reality of what's happening now. Because it seems it changed, maybe I'm getting older, but it seems it changes faster and faster. Mm-hmm. Clearly, recording music is not an easy way to create a revenue stream. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. That was a legitimate and good way to do that when I was younger. On the other hand, I think the freedom and potential to develop things and to create chamber music series, to build a community music school and have 500 kids a week coming through for lessons while you supervise 10 teachers. This seems to happen much more frequently than it did when I was younger. And I'm amazed at some of the business success stories of some graduates in this area. Yeah. The desire to hear music and the ways to hear music seems to increase. There's a career called the musical supervisor on a TV show. I had never heard of such thing before. And now a lot of shows hire somebody to supervise all the use of music in a show, rather than just somebody to compose the theme and somebody to compose background. I think the acknowledgement that the 20th century music was not modernist aberration, but itself an amazing, complex, and rich field of achievement is going to yield more strengths and institutions perhaps to support that, not just to support, quote, Baroque music, classical music, romantic music. I think the 20th century, now that we're in the 21st century, is coming into its own more. I think, too, students need a lot of shaping, a lot of formation, but they need a lot of courage now going into this musical world. And so I think encouragement, giving courage, drawing courage out of the student is very, very important. I think, frankly, the last year, we've all needed a lot of encouragement, because I'll tell you what, it reminded me of occasionally in orchestra when the lights have failed a little for a few moments and we try to keep playing by memory until they come back on. I think a lot of the music industry has been going as though the lights have been out for the past year, hoping they'll come back and we'll still know where we are.
That's a really good metaphor.
I think there's a lot of talk now about, as our country particularly, but the world, but particularly our country, wrestles with issues of diversity and racism and sexism. And I would even say incomeism and a lot of isms, but particularly diversity. People are being asked, well, you work in an institution or you work in a world where you're leaning very heavily on the, quote, masterpieces and achievements of people mostly from Europe, mostly dead and mostly men. And I have a different way of understanding music. Just as in theater, you've got the great and mighty Shakespeare, probably one person, one British English man who's been dead for nearly 500 years. But Shakespeare didn't build the globe. Shakespeare didn't produce the paper his plays were written on, nor did he create a lot of the legends he drew from. His creations have been reimagined and reworked over and reproduced in limitless possible contexts. I would love to see the classical music canon get much larger. I don't want to take anyone away from the table, but I want more people seated at the table. I think one of the great geniuses of the 20th century music is a guy named Maurice White, who most classical musicians may not know. He studied classical music. He was a drummer, and he founded a group called Earth, Wind, and Fire. And when I look at some of the things he did, it seems to me on the level of complexity and brilliance of many of the most leading classical activities in the 20th century. I want to see, in a way, Paul McCartney have a seat at the classical table. I want to see composers from Asia, from Australia, from Africa. Like, I want to see the canon get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But I don't want to take anything away either, because I think the St. Matthew Passion of Bach is going to speak to people thousands of years from now. I think the achievements of Robert Schumann could virtually not have happened without Clara Schumann. In some ways, I think their achievements need to be understood together. I think all of this, how we calculate who created what and what it means, should be a group activity. And in some ways, I think we need to spend more time looking farther from just Vienna and London and Paris for awesome examples of creativity. But I don't think that means we need to bury Vienna, Paris, and London either. And to me, a wondrous miracle of creation that keeps speaking to people, that for me, that's classical. And if it's got sound in it, and it's some kind of organized sound in some way, then it's music. And I think we're going to need to build a very large table for all of these creators to sit together.
I definitely agree. I think a lot of the classical music conversations about diversity that have been coming up can kind of stem from insecurity about letting go of the canon or the classical canon. So I like your point of we don't have to say goodbye to the music that served us for so long. It's just about broadening the programs and making a bigger table, like you said.
This will be one of our collective, I think, big projects for the next 100 years. And hopefully the musical family of greatness will get big and wide and broad.
Yes.
Anyways, great pleasure to talk to you today.
You too. Thank you. There were a lot of fantastic things that I'm taking away from my time speaking with Professor Chertock. One of those in particular is the concept that your definition of success changes over time, or at least it should change over time. For most of us, driving a car for the first time was a big achievement, or maybe playing our first scale on our instrument was a big achievement, and that was successful. And every day that we are learning something and trying something new, that is success. Just always making sure that we are continuing to evolve and achieve greater and greater things. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, there are multiple ways you can do so. First of all, you can go to our website, which is detoursandmusicpodcast.weebly.com. You could also subscribe to our YouTube channel, also called Detours and Music Podcast. We also have a Facebook page and Instagram account where you can like and follow us. The Detours and Music Podcast is available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, but on Apple Music podcast apps, you can subscribe and rate us. If you ever want to get in touch with me and give more direct feedback, you can email me at detoursandmusicpodcast@gmail.com. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you catch the next one.